Will China save Australia again? Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian.Heise here, and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. Grab your stein of coffee and let's have a look at this article written by Tarek Brooker from news.com.au discussing, well, Chinese demand for Australia's iron ore essentially. So China may rely on Australia to prevent an economic collapse. China says its economic recovery is strong, but new figures say otherwise. If it's to thrive, it needs something Australia has in abundance. We see here Chinese iron ore imports remain at an all-time record. So the red is the iron ore imports, the grey line is iron ore imports seasonally adjusted, and this is the trend line, so it's trending up. So generally, the narrative surrounding the recovery of the Chinese economy from the pandemic is positive. China's official figures say that industrial production has bounced back strongly and the construction industry is positively booming. But behind the big headlines forecasting a swift global recovery, there lurks a very different reality which Chinese households and local governments are experiencing. In the northwest province of, I'm going to try this one, Heilongjiang, local government officials have been told to go on a cost-cutting spree in order to free up funds to direct towards the economic recovery or to fight the pandemic. Under the 90-point directive, government employees were instructed to cut spending on pens, papers, scissors and glue. They were also told they should not expect a bonus or pay rise and that coloured printing was to be avoided. Frankly, sounds all very sensible things for anyone running a business. That coloured printing, guys, that's gonna destroy your economy. Despite their relative success in fighting the pandemic, general government revenue is expected to fall for the first time in 20 years, putting significant pressure on local and provincial governments across China. We can see here China's public revenue. So increased, but 2020 is a different story. With provincial governments only receiving around 50% of national revenue, but being responsible for 85% of overall government expenditure, provincial governments face an uphill battle as the Chinese economy continues to recover. But despite an overall attitude of relative thrift from Beijing and an escalation of the country's trade war with Australia, China is consuming our iron ore at a record pace, paying near top dollar prices. So let's have a look at that relationship a bit more. If we jump over here, we can see right now the price for iron ore is $117 a ton. And our budget is set, the government's budget is based on it being $50 a ton. So let's go to the 10-year data. Let's go to the oil data. So we're not at all-time highs. All-time highs were what, around $180, even above that, if we go further back. But let's have a look here at Australia. Now we can see iron ore is one of our biggest exports. It's our second biggest export, $48.1 billion. And we have a few iron ore mines here in Australia. This is Google Earth. And here I have the operating mines in Australia from the Australian Mines Atlas. Now this data is from 2014, but it is the best I could get. And watch this. Watch what happens when I turn on iron ore mines. Boom. Okay. Watch again. I'll turn it off. I'm looking at the screen so I can see it with you guys. Boom. On. Look at that. Western Australia. Okay, Western Australia is just one huge bunch of iron, bit of dirt, and a couple of cities. In all seriousness. We can also see that manifest, actually, in something else, in some other data. And I'll bring this up here with our shipping data, live shipping data. And once this loads up, you can just see, I agree, you can just see the amount of resources that are flowing out of Australia. Look at here, look at all the ships, the bulk haulers, the cargo haulers going, to and from, the bulk carriers, to and from Port Hedland, and all these port towns on the coast of Western Australia. Look at them all sitting there. So, yeah, there's a lot flowing out of Australia, guys. A lot of resources flowing out. So, but for China, let's have a look here. We can see where China is getting their iron ore. So that's 3.67% of their imports. And China are importing 1.61 trillion a year, and over 60%, 65.4% comes from Australia. Then you've got Brazil, and then South Africa. So Brazil is only at 18.5, and Brazil's reduction in supply is what's affected the price. So with all the political rhetoric, with all this stuff in the news, the Chinese let's say, provocative publications criticizing Australia, all the political back and forth. Look at how much they get from Australia. Maybe, sure, they can get sources from other countries, from Brazil, from India, from South Africa. Maybe if the Belt and Road steps it up, they'll have more access to these resources. But we're an advanced economy with regards to our economic, or let's say our resource gathering capabilities. We have a lot of the infrastructure in place that allows us to bulk ship large amounts quite efficiently. We can see that happening right here. Right here. Sure, we may not manufacture any of the equipment that we do to do this here in Australia. That's all imported. But still, we have it. That's a bit different to countries that don't have the same infrastructure. So, it's interesting just seeing how much of that relationship is. I mean, this is reality here. This is reality. And they're going to need our resources to fund their economic recovery. Now, does it matter from an Australian perspective if China just builds another million bloody ghost cities? But so long as there's demand for our resources, will that keep Australia up? Because often, another thing we see here, the Aussie dollar right now is sitting at 70 cents. So it's eased off a bit. But a lot of foreign investors invest in the Aussie dollar as if it were a proxy for the Chinese economy. So if the Chinese economy starts going down, we start to feel the ramifications of it. So let's jump back to this article. So this serves to illustrate the increasing two-speed nature of the Chinese economy. While heavy industry and construction continue to boom, the story told by the wallets of Chinese consumers is quite a different tale. And I wonder if we're going to see a K-shaped recovery in a lot of economies. Despite Beijing's best efforts, inflation-adjusted retail sales are still down year-on-year according to the latest data. This compares extremely unfavorably with the around 7% year-on-year growth the official statistics were recording before the pandemic reared its ugly head. For decades, China has been trying to slowly rebalance its economy away from real estate and infrastructure construction towards a more traditional consumer and services-driven model. Wouldn't that be nice if we could do that? In his last major speech as General Secretary of the Communist Party, Xi Jinping, immediate predecessor, in 2012 called for economic reforms that would increase consumer spending, ultimately with the goal of reducing Beijing's dependence on exports and fixed asset investments-driven growth. But in this time of crisis, it appears Beijing has fallen back into old habits of using infrastructure and real estate construction-driven growth to fire up its faltering economy in the same way it did back during the global financial crisis. On balance, this is good news for Australia, specifically iron ore exporters. Despite the rising tension between Beijing and Canberra and the growing list of Aussie exports hit by Chinese trade action, iron ore remains our one export China absolutely cannot do without. In an ironic twist of fate, the more China's economy potentially struggles to fire amid a backdrop of global economic uncertainty, the more Aussie iron ore is needed to keep its go-to industries booming to support its overall economic growth. Even Chinese Premier Ling Qingyang recently acknowledged that there were issues with China's ongoing economic recovery. During a meeting of the Chinese Communist Party State Council, Li conceded that consumer spending was the weak link in the economic recovery thus far. He went on to state that in order to increase consumer consumption, we need to explore new methods. China expert and Peking University financial professor Michael Pettis recently mused on Twitter that Li was right about China needing to explore new methods to drive consumer growth. But he ultimately concluded, for all its talk of upgrading consumption, Beijing has no idea of how to deliver the income increases that are required. Despite the overwhelming strength of Chinese industry and construction sectors, the less than stellar recovery being experienced by regular everyday consumers leaves the broader Chinese economy in a somewhat precarious position. During the GFC, the stimulus from Beijing was so large that China seemingly powered through the crisis relatively easy to the casual observer, but it came at a very heavy cost for Beijing. Debt levels skyrocketed to new heights, giving rise to concerns that there were growing risks of systematic issues from the ever-increasing mountain of debt. This is what has left China in the paradoxical situation it finds itself. On one hand, Beijing knows there are risks that come with another big cash splash and is attempting to be relatively thrifty where it can. On the other, it knows that its consumers have not bounced back to their previous levels of strength yet, and that its growing engine of infrastructure and real estate construction needs to be fueled by further stimulus. If the global economy bounces back strongly from the pandemic in the new year, as stimulus is increasingly tapered and withdrawn, Beijing may once again attempt to place its focus on rebalancing its economy towards a more consumer-driven model. But if the recovery of the world economy falters and Chinese industrial productions begin to suffer from weaker global demand, Beijing may increasingly look to its all tried and tested ways out of difficult crisis, more infrastructure and real estate construction, fueled by Aussie iron ore. So there we have it, everyone. Tarek's take on the relationship between China and our iron ore. I remember when there were discussions from China that they would look at spending, but it wouldn't be similar to what's happened in the past. It would be more digital and more technology as opposed to infrastructure, and which would have hurt Australia. But I mean, you can see here, look at the iron ore price at the moment. Guys, look at the iron ore price at the moment. It's doing quite well. $117. So what do you think, everyone? What are your how are you trying to capitalize on this potential demand for our iron ore? What are your hot share tips or companies that you have invested in? As always, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you're a fan and want to support the content I create, there are a few ways you can. You can join the channel on YouTube or Patreon. You can support us using our affiliate links at Amazon, eBay, Independent Reserve, or Kucoin. You can buy a merch from HeiseSays, use Gold Pass from the Perth Mint, or support us via PayPal. Take care, guys. Have a great day, and I will see you all in the next episode. Bye for now.